Boats are as much a part of the scenery as beaches and seagulls along the southwest shores of British Columbia. Kayaks, ferries, rubber dinghies, yachts, the flow of vessels past the shores of Vancouver Island or the Sunshine Coast is constant and varied. Hello, I'm Malcolm Stewart. You know, as a resident of the coast, I often travel to the BC interior for, well, a change of scenery. But after a few days, I find myself longing for a walk on the seashore to smell the salt and seaweed and watch the boats and marine life. In this episode of BC Moments, we'll head down to the sea to view the work of one of BC's most famous boat designers. We'll sail up the coast on two BC-built tall ships crewed by young mariners in training. Our first port of call is part of the mainland just up the coast from Vancouver, where boats, marinas, and sheltered anchorages hold prominent places in the landscape. The Sunshine Coast is as isolated from British Columbia's lower mainland as any island. Why else would you need ferries to get there? Yet it's hardly remote. Less than 20 kilometers of ocean separate the Sunshine Coast from Greater Vancouver and 2 million people. A seagull can fly there in 20 minutes. A BC ferry can make it in 40. Across Howe Sound from Vancouver, the Sunshine Coast is also part of the BC mainland. It lies along the eastern shores of Georgia and Malaspina Straits, from Gibsons to Powell River and Sarah Point. But the Sunshine Coast has no roads to the outside world. It's hemmed in by mountains and fragmented by deep lakes and fjords. While ferries connect the highways, float planes provide access to the farthest reaches, and boats are part of everyday life. "50,000 people live here, clustered in oceanside communities around the highway that follows the shore. Resourcefulness is inherent in the small-town lifestyle. Just as natural resources are ingrained in the economy, timber and pulp from the forests, gravel from the hills, clean water and nutrients from the sea. Besides about 2,000 hours of annual sunshine, the most natural of the Sunshine Coast resources is the scenery. It feeds the tourist industry. It attracts retirees looking for agreeable surroundings. And it draws almost everyone outdoors. This is traditional cottage country for Vancouverites. Some vacation properties have hardly changed for generations. Others have been transformed into permanent homes. For travelers from Vancouver, the first pocket of Sunshine Coast civilization is Gibsons. Population 4,000 or so. It was George Gibson who founded the town, but the Beachcombers, well, they really put it on the map. For 2 decades, the weekly CBC drama showcased Gibsons as a salty backwater on the wilder edge of Howe Sound. Fishermen and loggers gossiped over coffee at Molly's Reach while tugboats chugged past the windows. Viewers around the world saw eagles in the treetops, kids crabbing off the piers, and a community sandwiched between mountains and sea. The Beachcombers series ended in 1991, but Gibsons remains on the map. There are more than 30 provincial parks on the Sunshine Coast, and almost all are down on the seashore. Tetrahedron is a mountain park, and one of the few where recreation is restricted. It was set aside mainly to protect the domestic water supply for the Seashelt area. That's a wave! Seashelt on this coast has many meanings. It's a district with 8,000 people. It's an inlet, a peninsula, and an Aboriginal nation who's lived here longer than anyone. The Seashelt people are BC's first native band to become self-governing. Now they are partners in the development of local industries, and their culture is an integral part of local society. Downtown Seashelt is built on a natural land bridge connecting Seashelt Peninsula to the south end of the Sunshine Coast. On one side, Seashelt Inlet snakes off into the coast mountains. On the other, the Strait of Georgia stretches across to Vancouver Island. The waters on both sides of Seashelt are prime cruising territory, with many of the best anchorages in or close to marine parks. A short sail up the coast from Seashelt, Smuggler Cove is often a stopover for boaters. Others head into Secret Cove to replenish their larders. Just offshore, Buccaneer Bay is the smaller of the two parks that protect about one-half of the Thormanby Islands. Some of the family cottages on land outside the parks have been here since the early 1900s. Up the coast off Malaspina Strait, Pender Harbor is undoubtedly the most convoluted cruising water. A rocky warren of back-to-back bays, islands, and hamlets. Venice of the North, some call it, with its own style of modern-day gondolas. Madeira Park is the largest community on Pender Harbor, with marinas, an oceanfront boardwalk, and a September Jazz Festival. The most popular anchorage is across the harbor at Garden Bay, an outpost for yacht clubs from Vancouver and Washington State. In the neighboring cove, the inn at the head of Hospital Bay was a hospital run by the Columbia Coast Mission when there were no roads here. Farther up the coast of the Seashelt Peninsula, Sackinaw Lake almost meets the ocean. Typical of big lakes on the Sunshine Coast, it looks like a saltwater inlet, with steep shores, wooded islands, and wet summer fun. Agamemnon Channel is a passage to Jervis Inlet, BC's deepest fjord. Its confluence with Jervis is also the gateway to Seashelt Inlet. Boaters traveling to the town of Seashelt may hole up at Egmont until slack water in Skookumchuck Narrows. No point trying to buck these tides. They're a mariner's nightmare, sometimes gushing out of Seashelt Inlet at 30 kilometers an hour. Boaters who make it to the end of the inlet might moor at the local pub, or find a safe haven at Porpoise Bay Park, a favored clam digging spot for beachcombers and campers. The tip of the Seashelt Peninsula is the end of the highway for the lower half of the Sunshine Coast. The road to the upper half is on the far side of Jervis Inlet, a ferry crossing of less than 1 hour. Highway travelers can catch another ferry from Westview Terminal in Powell River to Vancouver Island and complete a 250-kilometer island Sunshine Coast circle route. Slightly fewer than half the residents of the Sunshine Coast inhabit the upper end. Most, about 13,000, live in the municipality of Powell River. Since the early 1900s, this has been a forestry town, and the mill dominates both the economy and scenery. But the hulks are more of an eye-catcher. A derelict fleet of World War II supply ships forms a breakwater around log booms for the mill. Powell River Paper Company erected the first mill in the early 1900s. It also built a community with more than 400 homes and commercial buildings. In 1995, the original town site was declared a National Historic Region, preserving the architectural essence of a company town from the early 20th century. With all the water and woods, life here is mainly an outdoor event. An award-winning 13-kilometer trail at Inland Lake Park is designed for wheelchairs. For ambitious paddlers, the Powell Forest Canoe Route is an 80-kilometer adventure through a wilderness of 12 lakes joined by streams and portage trails. Closer to the center of town, Mowat Bay Park is a favorite gathering place for locals looking for an antidote to summer heat. The historic hotel at Lund, up coast from Powell River, is a familiar landmark to mariners. It's a supply center for private boaters and a takeoff point for water taxis to the sandy beaches of Savory Island. Copeland Island's Marine Park and Bliss Landing are the last sheltered anchorages on the Sunshine Coast for boaters going to Desolation Sound or farther up BC's Inside Passage. Sarah Point, at the tip of Malaspina Peninsula, is the northern end of the Sunshine Coast. Beyond lies a coastal wilderness, both isolated and remote, a roadless maze of islands, fjords, mountains, and rainforests. It's virtually impossible to travel the BC coast without encountering boats designed by Bill Garden. He's one of BC's most respected naval architects, and his boat plans are preserved in books and maritime museums and displayed through hundreds of vessels currently cruising the oceans of the world. His home and headquarters are at Toad Landing, a tiny Gulf island near Swartz Bay. Owners of Bill Garden boats gathered near Toad Landing at Port Sydney Marina to pay tribute to the man who designed their beloved boats.
For more than 30 years, this island off Sydney has been the home of legendary Northwest naval architect Bill Garden. Over the last 60 years, Mr. Garden has created designs for workboats and yachts that have been built around the world. As a result of his decades of work on both power and sailing yachts here in BC, his property, dubbed Toad's Landing, has come to be known as a sort of Santa's workshop for adults who truly enjoy messing about in boats. A 1998 rendezvous of 30 of his vessels provided us with a unique opportunity for this retrospective look at some of his work.
Among the fairest vessels that travel the BC coast are the tall ships of the Sail and Life Training Society. SALTS, as it's known, is based in Victoria Harbour, where boats are built as training ships for young sailors who spend days at sea learning maritime skills and traditions. Wherever these lovely tall ships appear with their youthful crews, they attract crowds of nautically curious and hopelessly envious boat lovers.
To run away to sea in a tall ship. It was a common escape in earlier times. But to sail aboard such classic vessels today is a rare privilege indeed. Every year, more than 1,000 young mariners earn their sea legs on the ships of the Sail and Life Training Society. Though they resemble the vessels of old world explorers, these modern-day tall ships are Coast Guard certified and carry state-of-the-art navigation and safety gear. But the essence of traditional shipboard life, the camaraderie, the adventure, has changed little from one century to the next. Based on Vancouver Island in Victoria, the Sail and Life Training Society, SALTS as it's known, is a non-profit Christian organization founded in 1974. Its mission is to encourage the physical and spiritual development of young people through sail training. The SALTS vessels were tailor-made for the purpose. It takes teamwork to sail them, and a lot of smiles and courtesy to share such tight quarters for days at sea. The Pacific Grace, a 33-meter gaff-rigged schooner, was built at SALT's Heritage Shipyard. She was commissioned in the spring of 2001 amid a great deal of fanfare at Victoria Harbour. The Pacific Swift, a 25-meter topsail schooner, was built in Vancouver as a working exhibit at Expo 86. She sailed to Spain for Expo 92 and has logged over 100,000 nautical miles. Offshore trainees have sailed the Swift to such far-off places as Ireland, Panama, Australia, and Pitcairn Island. Most journeys are closer to home, along the coast of British Columbia, touted by boaters worldwide as the wildest, most scenic cruising territory. A tight ship runs on chains of command and rules that must be observed by all. 30 trainees aboard each vessel are divided into 3 watches, each with its own chores and responsibilities. Good seamanship is a mix of technical knowledge and hands-on experience. SALT's trainees learn to plot courses and to read weather, wind, and tides before putting their new skills to use. Each watch is assigned a dory, and with every trip ashore, there's a notable improvement in confidence and boat handling. The SALT's boats are comfortable but Spartan. There's fresh water to drink, but none for showers. Rinsing the salt spray from a sun-bleached body might require a hike to a lake in the rainforest. With everyone clean and the dories nested on board, grace is sung before dinner. Life on a schooner moves at a hectic pace, and times to regroup are an important part of the schedule. It's during the quiet moments that youthful philosophies are debated and the seeds of lasting friendships are sown. A boat full of young sailors doesn't stay quiet long. More than 30 voices join in the sea shanties at after-dinner mug-up. Even within the confines of the ship's hold, there's room for a bit of dancing. It's not only people, it's places. Natural places, a world away from the cities and urban pressures of teenage life. It's exploration and challenge. And it's a timeless adventure to sail like ancient mariners in the 21st century. A rare privilege indeed.
I must down to the seas again, to the lonely sea and the sky, and all I ask is a tall ship and a star to steer her by. British poet laureate John Masefield was only 22, not much older than the Salts cruise when he wrote Sea Fever in 1900. If he could come to the south coast of BC today, he'd find his tall ship, along with a youthful sense of adventure that is undiminished since his own youth a century ago. While many British Columbians live for the sea and its ever-changing moods, others are equally at home in the mountains or grasslands of the interior. BC Moments from Knowledge Network, a series supported by our partners in knowledge, covers it all. I'm Malcolm Stewart, inviting you to come with us and explore these places in upcoming episodes.